Yeah. Sorry, classic developer going into the details way too fast.
The community, I would say, was excited about the coin going up in 2021, but the community really stayed around for the promise of what could be built and how the network could be used.
And then I did this hackathon in May 2021. I was like, wow, like this tech is really good. Like you have magical moments where you send transactions through, and it just doesn't really feel like a blockchain. Blockchain's a new type of technology, but like all the game theory about market makers, informed flow, uninformed flow, like that stuff doesn't change.
I think you guys are on a kind of a new paradigm of what is possible. We're live.
We're live.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you for having me.
We're having the podcast in person, which is great. Been a while since I've done an in-person podcast, but they're much more fun. I think they're much better than Zoom podcasts or Riverside. Just a different vibe.
Yeah.
They take more time to coordinate, though.
Yeah, sometimes you gotta like find batteries for mics and scramble around, but you get it done.
You get it done. It's kind of like a startup.
Yeah, it's like a startup.
You make it happen. But no, super excited to be doing this. You're one of the lead engineers of Drift Protocol. You've been a Solana OG, though. You've been involved in the ecosystem for some time, through the ups, the downs, and everything that's been going on with the market. So maybe just starting out, how do you feel like, I mean, the state of the market is? How is like the Solana ecosystem today in your point of view?
That's a good question. I think, yeah, so I started in the middle of 2021, which was when like it was Sol's first bull market, and there was a ton of excitement. But interestingly, I feel like the tech was just like in a very nascent form. So using it, especially on mainnet, was like it was rough around the edges. I think if you go to use it now, it's way, way, way better. So very few transactions get dropped. Usually have way less issues just interacting with the chain. So I would say the tech is way better.
You were the summer class of 2020, weren't you?
Yeah, I started in crypto 2020 and then started like Solana full time 2021.
Okay. Interesting. So you were in the beginning of the bull market and kind of got to see the ups and downs throughout the network. How would you compare like the sentiment from like, I mean, obviously a lot has happened, but like 2021 to today?
Yeah, it's it's pretty crazy because in 2021 there's a lot of FOMO, and you feel like you need to build super fast or you're going to be left behind. And then you see a lot of teams like racing to market, which is natural, but also I think forces teams to cut a lot of things and maybe sacrifice on certain parts of their product. And also like Solana was also in its nascent stage. So you go on Twitter and everyone's like, oh, this is like the future of France. And then you're using it in practice and it's like, it's leaving something to be desired. And then markets are, predictably irrational. So like there's this huge bubble. And at the top, you're like, this doesn't make sense. But then you're looking around and everyone's like, this makes sense. And you're like, I guess, okay. And then there's just this like, huge, fall off, and it like really challenges your conviction. But then I guess you just come back to the fact, like in the bear market, like is the tech getting better? Are the products getting better? Like, do you actually, if you didn't know anything about prices, do you see some progression? And I think that's kind of what just like the Drift contributors have been focused on, just seeing how much better like the Solana network has gotten, how much better the Drift product has gotten, and like across Solana, how much better the products have gotten.
It is remarkable just looking at the community, even the community being able to articulate or kind of fight against the FUD has grown remarkably. I mean, the community, I would say, was excited about the coin going up in 2021, but the community really stayed around for the promise of what could be built and how the network could be used. But maybe going back to your point, I mean, you said Solana was kind of rough around the edges in 2021 when you first started building. Can you talk about, I mean, first off, why you chose Solana, the architecture, instead of kind of the infinite other L1s architectures that you could have built upon?
Yeah, so I was definitely late to the game, like becoming smart contract developer 2021. So I was trying to learn Solidity and whatnot, and it just wasn't very like fun to develop on, just because it was kind of tough, like being expensive and slow. And I was on a sabbatical of sorts, and I did the 2021 Solana hackathon. And I was like, oh, it's actually funny. I had coworkers at Amazon that talked about Rust. So I was like, oh, I'm just gonna read the Rust book, learn Rust, and then like hackathon sucks. Like at least I know Rust and I can brag about it to my friends. And then I did this hackathon in May 2021. I was like, wow, like this tech is really good. Like you have magical moments where you send transactions through, and it just doesn't really feel like a blockchain. And then in addition to that, like the whole community on Twitter was really fun to engage with. Like, and I was like, okay, this is great. Like I want to build here. So it was definitely a combination of feeling like the tech had promise, like it was like a 10x improvement, and then the community was like a social layer that I enjoyed a bunch.
Yeah. The, I mean, hitting the send button or like initiating a token transfer and it pretty much happening or confirming like instantaneously is like 100x improvement from using Ethereum. And you're like, all right. And then you wait. And then you're like, okay, please go through. And so it is it a night and day difference just from the user perspective, and I can't imagine the engineering side as well.
Yeah. So I think one of the things you learn with as you're designing like kind of smart contracts and protocols on top of Solana is the fact that the fees are so cheap and the block times are fast. It kind of opens up a design space on what you can do off. So DeFi protocols typically have like keeper networks or off-chain dependencies, like your most common one being a liquidator, where it has to monitor what's going on chain and potentially take actions to like keep the protocol in a healthy state. And basically, by driving down the cost and the block times, like what you can do with your keeper network is way big. So Drift really just took this idea and like kind of maxed it out, where we have keeper bots that are permissionless, doing all sorts of things for our exchange, and like we think fundamentally like that's why it's going to end up being a great experience for users. So like I can dive into that more, but I think the fact like there's the UX side where people get you know fast transactions, cheap fees, and then there's like the dev side where yeah, you get this larger design space, which just like is it's a different canvas for you to work on of sorts.
100%. I mean, at Frictionless, our entire thesis is like high throughput blockchains ultimately enable new applications that are just not possible on low throughput. I mean, it's kind of comical. Like you look back to DeFi that kind of built the industry, all respect to them. Yeah, they were really designed for an architecture that was limited to 10 to 12 transactions per second. And that constraint really forces you to do some innovative things like creating AMMs, but it doesn't allow you to do things such as order books or kind of these faster liquidities. And so at very like fractions of a penny too. And so it is interesting. I think you guys are on a kind of a new paradigm of what is possible and would love to kind of dive into it as well.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess how Drift works is it's very auction based and event based. And I think the thing about event based is
Can you tell people just maybe that are not familiar with you or your work and also Drift, just a high level architecture overview of what Drift is and before like diving into the tech?
yeah, sorry, classic developer going into the details way too fast. Yeah, Drift is a margin trading and derivatives trading protocol. So decentralized, permissionless, with the goal of providing like a fast, seamless trading experience for your active trader, and then also providing like compelling passive strategies for your more like mid to low frequency type investor. And I guess Drift has a lot of unique things about it, but I think the biggest thing is that basically it's very event based. In TradFi, it's not like you just have an order book or an AMM. Actually, there's this whole like larger holistic system that goes for getting users a trade. So part of that in TradFi, you hear about payment for order flow, where like if you're on Robinhood, you submit an order and actually your order gets routed to a market maker, and they actually pay to fill you. And there's it's not like your trade is hitting a clob, right? And for that to all work, you kind of you need things to be more event based, be faster, etc. So one way to frame Drift is it's a decentralized payment for order flow protocol on top of like your standard AMM and cloud. And where I guess this is very like in the DeFi protocol type meta, but it's like how can you make it sustainable for market makers to market make on chain? It's actually a really hard problem. Like without token emissions, LPs like aren't doing great. And there's like all this work to figure out, okay, how can we make this sustainable on chain? So Drift is taking this event-based payment for order flow model, and we think it could be like a winner.
I think, I mean, it's interesting. Really, the entire TradFi world is centered around kind of order books, being able to, and teams have gotten really, really good at market making. I mean, they're really professionals in kind of the market making sense. And I think because of the limitations of the blockchain and the blockchain architecture, we really had to innovate and do some of these new things around AMMs. But now you're kind of trying to reinvent the wheel and learn how to be like an LP. Is it profitable? Is it not profitable? And that gets into like a whole nother can of worms where if you can go back and actually do like the order book on chain, you have the high throughput, even like payment for order flow. Those are things that the TradFi really world knows that again can be brought on a blockchain. And it's just kind of a unique combination of the technology has kind of gotten to the point where it's good enough that you can build this type of stuff that you're doing with Drift. And the TradFi world also understands. So a lot of cool possibilities to come.
Yeah, definitely. It's like blockchain's a new type of technology, but like all the game theory about market makers, informed flow, uninformed flow, like that stuff doesn't change. And like it doesn't, like you need to respect kind of those rules of economics if you're going to build a sustainable system. Doesn't matter, like just because you're in a slow, kind of like high latency environment, like you can't get around that.
Yeah. So getting like a little bit deeper into Drift on like the technical architecture side, you mentioned a couple things, keepers, etc. Could you dive a little bit deeper in how you're kind of building the technology stack on a blockchain?
Yeah, I guess so. First, to start with like a traditional model, like an AMM or CLOB, you're a user and you want to make a trade. Using a UI or like a SDK, you send a trade through to the blockchain. You take some liquidity, whether it's an AMM or CLOB like Orca or Phoenix. You get your trade, and then you're done. And so, really, what's going on here is like the market maker or the LP puts their liquidity on chain, it's resting, and then the taker comes second, and they take from it. The goal of Drift and something like a RFQ, request for quote, or a payment for order flow model is actually you have the taker go first. The taker says, hey, I want to buy something or sell something. And then market makers come in and they're like, oh yeah, I can provide that for you. And so you kind of invert the sequencing there. So the whole idea around Drift is whether you're trading derivatives or spot, the taker is going to come in. They're going to submit an order saying like, I want to buy SOL, I want to sell SOL perp. This is the price I'm willing to accept over this time range, and that gets queued up on chain. Once it's queued up on chain, market makers can race to fill that order, or keepers or fillers can basically see that order and go and find resting liquidity to fill it with, whether that is Phoenix or OpenBook for spot or the Drift AMM for perps. And like that's kind of how our order system works. And when I'm talking about like the order, the ticker order getting queued up, it's all event based. Like you as a trader, you put your order on chain. It's been 400 milliseconds. All the market makers are listening, waiting to bid on it. All the fillers are waiting to pick it up and try to route it to whatever liquidity sources it can. And so it's very fast and all event based. And
what is the benefit of inverting it and having the taker go first, then having the LP kind of put the liquidity on chain?
Yeah, so I guess from the LP and the market maker's perspective, you want to provide liquidity to uninformed flow, someone who doesn't have an opinion on where the price is going, and you don't want to provide liquidity to like toxic flow or informed flow. And it's all about like the size of the spread or how much fees you have to charge are all based on the distribution between toxic and untoxic flow. So by basically making the taker go first, the market maker can actually see like, oh, is this just a normal user? Or is this like an arbitrager who knows something? And so they actually have more time to be confident like, oh, I can actually give you a good deal. I can trust you. You don't know something that I don't know. And so by making the taker go first, basically you invert like the information asymmetry, and makers can actually give takers better prices. And so it's kind of like there's different parties involved in DeFi. There's your like average retail user who just wants to enter a position. There's a market maker who wants to provide liquidity, and then there's these sophisticated arbitragers who think they have some edge on where the price is going, and they're looking to basically pick off like Um, and so the goal of Drift is to get the retail user, your average trader, and your market maker to have a great symbiosis and like be able to play sustainable games with each other while minimizing the value that's extracted by the arbitrager. And basically, like all this AMM cloud design is like trying to figure out how those three parties, like how does the value get split up between them. And so Uniswap, I guess actually, I'm just riffing. There is like the fourth party, which is the miner, like an MEV.
Hmm.
So also with like with a take, like if you're a retail trader and you just submit an order and it's like just a raw swap on AMM, like obviously like a miner on Ethereum or validator on Ethereum can like manipulate your order and get you a really bad price. So it's all about like trying to give like, well, I guess it depends who you want to preference, but in Drift, it's like we want the market maker and your average trader to like get most of the value, not leak to the validator or to the arbitrager.
Interesting.
I mean, still early, so I don't know exactly how it works, but this is the idea behind Uniswap Act that just came out this week. So actually, it was very, it was a little bit validating because obviously Uniswap's like big brand, prestigious. Like their design is very similar to how Drift works, where in Uniswap X you don't just like send an order and hit the AMM. Now you're gonna like have an order queued up off chain, go through an RFQ process, which is like request for quote, where it's like the taker goes first, and then like market makers can fill it. And the reason they're doing that is basically like to reduce the MEV capture that you get on like an AMM.
And so they're trying to kind of simulate what a market maker is trying to do on kind of a lower throughput chain, and you guys are actually working with both sides and can enable the market making because of the high throughput chain.
Yeah, I think it's like I don't know if it's live yet or what the state of it is, but it sounds like yeah, like they have users sign gasless transactions and kind of have to route that transaction around off chain because to do the auction and the RFQ quickly enough, like you can't do it at the block speed of ETH.
Yeah.
So they actually have to do this RFQ process off chain. Where for Drift, we actually have users queue their order on chain, and the block times are so short, you can do the Dutch auction all on chain, which is nice because then it's like more transparent, more permissionless, etc. But it's interesting seeing Uniswap that's like led the way in AMM design, kind of being like, yeah, you need some type of event-based like auction system to make it more sustainable for like users and market makers, just because like yeah, users get pretty hurt in MEV on Ethereum.
Yeah.
Like there's so much value extracted. So
Do you feel like, I mean, we could take this a lot of ways. I talked with the founder of DFlow on kind of how they're doing is trying to mitigate the toxic order flow. But also, I mean, I feel like we could go down the rabbit hole of like AMMs versus order books. Is there any particular way that you kind of want to take it?
I think I guess the toxic flow one applies to both. So if you're market making on a club, like you still have to deal with the issue of potentially like that the club doesn't save you from toxic flow. Basically, it just gives you more precise control of how you're quoting. I mean, yeah, we could talk about toxic flow.
Cool, let's do it. So on the toxic flow side, I mean, there's a couple. I mean, as far as I know, it's just you and DFlow. DFlow, I think, decided to build their own app chain on Cosmos, but you guys are kind of sticking with the Solana type architecture. Do you feel like, in particular, there's best practices to mitigate the toxic flow on chain?
Yeah, there's very tactical things you can do. Like I think a lot you see Drift, Mango, Phoenix. They do things like time and force, where your order is only valid for a few seconds. So if like the chain goes down and you can't cancel your order, it automatically gets canceled. Like very small things like that. Oracle pegged orders where like the price of your order is based on the Oracle, so you don't have to like race to update your quotes and stuff. I think that type of stuff is useful. But I guess I think what we're doing at Drift is especially unique where, yeah, just having this kind of event based auction where the taker goes first, this kind of like game theory will play out where it makes it harder for like a sophisticated arbitrager to just like instantly pick you off, and it should be friendlier for like your average market maker.
And so from the consumer side, I mean, that's not familiar with kind of this level of financial engineering. They ultimately get better prices. They're not necessarily paying wider spreads, just more efficient capital efficiency, correct?
Yeah, the goal is to get your normal user the best prices possible. So like when you enter a trade, what's going to happen is it's going to specify this like auction where like the start price of the auction is really aggressive. Maybe you get filled at like the Oracle price. And then the price basically decays and gets worse and worse where it eventually crosses like the spread of the resting liquidity. So the goal is actually you'll get better fills than what you would do if you just took immediately from resting liquidity, because market makers will be able to see like, oh, you're just your average Joe. Like I'm happy to trade with you, and so I'll actually give you a better price. And then what I leave resting on chain is only for people who like really want to get out fast and either like are like a forced buyer seller, or maybe they are like a sophisticated arbitrager. So like I guess what I imagine is going to happen on Solana is you'll see wider spreads like just for the resting liquidity, but then you'll see like these drift type auctions still get users price improvement. And I think it's inevitable. Like with MEV too, it makes it really hard to just leave your liquidity resting on chain unless it's like really expensive to take against it. Because I'm going down a rabbit hole, but
Go for it.
if you're a searcher on Jito and I'm looking at OpenBook and I see that you have like you have an ask at like $30 for Solana, and for some reason I have information the price is about to rocket, I'll just bid up on Jito to take your liquidity faster than you can cancel your order. And so like once you add in like searchers and MEV into the game, it's really hard to leave liquidity resting on chain, like unless you start doing these weird like protocol kind of augmentations to save it.
I mean, the people listening that maybe are not familiar with like kind of all the on-chain stuff that is happening, do you feel like there's a TradFi equivalent to all of this that has already been figured out? Now it's just we're kind of porting it over to a blockchain and refiguring out some of the components with the element that the blockchain introduces?
Yeah. I guess we thought a lot about payment for order flow. I know that sometimes gets bad news in the press, but we kind of realized that it created this relationship between traders and market makers that seemed pretty symbiotic. So I think that's where we see it going, where like your average trader trades on Robinhood. They have a good experience. They like using it. It's fast. They don't really necessarily care about like a CLOB or AMM. They just want to like get in at good prices. And market makers are happy to work in that system. Versus like, yeah, market making on chain is like a war zone right now. So it's like, and the users end up having a worse experience because the fees are higher, the spreads are larger. So it's like, how can we avoid that?
How tight do you think comparatively spreads can be versus kind of a exchange or traditional TradFi?
I guess I think on chain the spreads will be larger than like a centralized exchange. Like on Bitcoin on a centralized exchange, it could be like one tick, like very tight. But on chain, just because of like the MEV stuff, the arbitragers, even like an arbitrager like on Solana, because the transaction fees are so small, you can like send a transaction and say like try to pick off this LP, and then if I get a bad price, just revert it. And I paid like sub penny to do that. So it's really asymmetric in the arbitrager's favor. So I think spreads will be larger on chain, but I think with like these payment for order flows, RFQ style models, like your normal trader could still get filled like around Oracle. And so like they still get the same prices they might get on a centralized exchange. So I see I see Solana larger spreads, but still good fills for your average trader.
And it's interesting. I mean, on the equities front, I mean, particularly like in the US, it's actually a small subset of the global population that actually can trade equities versus tokens, like, is really a global market. You can have tokens be traded anywhere, which I think honestly just unlocks a lot more capital. So I'm interested to see once like capital and these investments or protocols, tokens, these different entities can be bought on chain, and the more liquidity that is ultimately able to come online because of it, how it turns out.
Yeah, that's definitely I guess the like addressable market is the globe, which is really crazy.
Yeah.
And it's kind of crypto's like saving grace. Like if it was only the US, the TAM might be a lot smaller, but yeah, I think that's part of what's so encouraging is that it like connects. It's like globalized. So everyone's operating on the same chain.
In terms of kind of building specifically on the Solana architecture, I mean, there's a couple different things that Solana recently did to make the network more performant, but there's still some constraints, whether that being kind of the compute limits, bandwidth, or even state contention. Solana just launched this year localized fee markets. Can you talk kind of, even though Solana is very high performance, building within that constraints for Drift?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's gonna keep me down a rabbit hole, but yeah. So Solana, one thing is the right lock contention, the state contention is if you have multiple people trying to write to the same piece of state, they're gonna have to fight for it, which is what the priority fees try to solve. Drift basically tries to minimize how often you have. So like on a traditional AMM, every order is touching the AMM. So you're always going to have right lock contention with anyone else touching the AMM. Or in a CLOB, for example, every time someone places an order, you have right lock contention with other people placing an order. In Drift, we actually store each user's orders in separate accounts. So if one market maker just wants to spam their orders to like stay up to date, they're not going to have any right lock contention with another market maker. And basically, we did that because we were like, okay, if we want to like keep scaling out the number of market makers, it'll be a lot easier if they're not competing with each other. So that already kind of helps with the right lock contention. The only time two traders in a market have right lock contention is if they're doing a trade. And in finance, like the order to trade ratio is like 100 to 1.
Okay.
So you can get way more throughput if orders don't have right lock contention. So that's one of the main things that we worked on. It makes our system a little quirky relative to others, but I think there's a good chance it'll scale well because of that.
That's super unique. And for the other people, I mean, most blockchains are single threaded, just meaning every transaction has to be executed one after another. Solana is unique because I believe it's the first blockchain that enabled parallelism. So if you're writing to an account that no one else is writing, those can be executed simultaneously. When they are executed simultaneously, it's just a lot more throughput. And so to that point, being able to specify individual accounts for people to trade upon does increase the throughput dramatically. How do you feel like for the Phoenixes of the world, the AMMs of the world on Solana or parallelized chains, if they don't deal with that like right lock contention? How's that going to work for them? Fees are just going to be higher to get priority access to the chain?
Yeah, I think the bet there is the priority fees. That like you'll use the priority fees to adjudicate that. So like if it's a time of like low excitement, maybe your priority fees are lower, and then if things start heating up, like prices are moving really crazy, everyone has to just use priority fees and do it intelligently.
That'll be interesting.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about the CLOB. Like it's fair. Like everything is there's one account. Everything's stored in there. There's great price time priority. Like there's a reason why the CLOB maxis love it. But I think like I don't think it's just like once you have a CLOB, you're just going to scale this thing to so many users on top of Solana. You're probably going to hit some bottlenecks. I don't know at how many users or how many transactions, but definitely something for Drift that we think about is just like, we want to serve users right now and not be like maximalist about certain subsystem designs, like whether to use the cloud or the AMM. We just want as many users as possible, like interacting in like a permissionless setting. So that's why we went with this more unorthodox approach, which we call the decentralized limit order book.
I like it. And so on the bandwidth side, I think Solana also has, a lot of bandwidth, but they kind of enforce it via compute limits. Can you talk about bandwidth or compute limits or how they're intertwined?
Yeah. So the compute limits come with are kind of related to the write lock contention, where a compute limit is enforced at like the account level, where in a certain block only an account can only have a certain amount of compute units writing to it. So I don't remember the exact number. It might be like 10 million. And the max in a transaction is like 1.4 million, but it's usually a lot smaller. So again, it's like it kind of the more you can parallelize your write lock contention, the less likely you're going to run into like that compute unit limit. So I think on that side, like us just or Drift being really careful about account design kind of helps with that a bunch. On the bandwidth side, more so how it has to do with RPCs. There's just a lot of like you got to think intelligently about kind of how you index, how you're going to fetch the accounts you need on the client side. So for Drift, like on chain, it basically keeps up to date whether a user has a position and whether they have an order. And based on that, the client can just decide whether they want to fetch all the users that have a position. That would be something like for a liquidator, or if it just wants to fetch users which have an order, or even whether it just wants to listen to updates for users that are opening up market orders. And so like you got to be kind of clever to think about like, okay, yeah, how much data do I have to fetch from the RPCs, and how can I do it really fast so that everything is like event based, happening quickly, so that like market makers can compete in an auction and users can get filled really quickly.
So from all that, being event based, like does Solana today, do you butt up against the bandwidth limitations, or where do you find either the restrictions or either pros that kind of Solana offers?
Yeah, I think the most annoying thing for us on the client side has been because all the orders for users are stored in different accounts. We have to fetch initially we were just fetching all the user accounts, and there was like thousands of them, which is just like a huge headache. So there's a lot of work to be done to make it so like to get all the relevant information from the RPC quickly is like you're fetching the minimum amount of user accounts to get all the orders you need. So this is like very tactical, but like working with the RPCs on Solana is probably one of the hardest like developer experiences, just because like it's just like a shit ton of data.
Yeah,
So
there's a lot. It is a lot of data. On the RPC side, have you guys gone through like different vendors? What are some of your learnings from that?
yeah, that's a good question. Well, we use two vendors, and like basically the bots that like the Drift contributors run are kind of like just public good versions of the bots, like Liquidator, Fillers, etc. And we'll run like two versions of everything. So just like things go down in the RPC side, like just kind of randomly, just because the network moves so fast. People are always upgrading things. But right now we work with RPC Pool or Trident and Helios, and for the most part, it's been really good. I think the main thing is like you have to like really understand like all the RPC methods, what they mean, and like think about what data you can add to your program accounts so that like you can index them and fetch them quickly. Like you kind of have to really when you create your on-chain accounts, like how is the client side going to get these in a way that like minimizes bandwidth? It's kind of something we had to learn over time, and you kind of need to do if you want to keep scaling the number of users using your protocol.
Yeah, it is interesting. You guys truly are on the pioneers. Just being early to the protocol in of itself, but also figuring out how to scale your application within the constraints of the architecture design.
Yeah, like we're definitely pushing up against like the boundaries. I think Drift is like the protocol, users using the protocol at like pay the most fees and priority fees. So like yeah, we're doing a lot. It's a lot of like you try something, you see how it goes, and then you just keep optimizing things, squeezing things out, like reducing unnecessary transactions, making RPCs more efficient. So I'm reading this book called like Chip Wars, where it talks about like the evolution of semiconductors and like how they actually achieved Moore's law. It wasn't like just like sexy research breakthrough over and over again. It was just like grinding out the engineering.
Blood, sweat, and tears.
Yeah. So I think developing DeFi protocols is more like that. It's like, okay, you get to, a certain amount of active users. Right now there's 2,000 people with open positions on Drift. To get to 10,000, we just like gotta like the contributors just keep grinding and squeezing out efficiency. And I think Solana is the best place to do that right now.
What would it take you to kind of be able to support 100,000 or a million or 10 million? I know like the industry, in my opinion, is still relatively small and we really need to scale. Do you feel like, is that just the architecture design itself, like being able to have more throughput, such as Fire Dancer? Is it just the blood, sweat, and tears of the application engineers kind of learning what works and what doesn't work and best practices?
Yeah, I guess yeah, I think getting the validator to be like the underlying like throughput there isn't maxing out is important. Um, Protocol level, like making sure the right lock contention and the compute unit limits are all respected and like really optimized. And I think where actually a lot of the difficulty comes is probably at the RPC level. Like, how do you have all these people using and interacting with it? Like when there's so many users, like that's actually where a lot of like, Web 2 scaling challenges come up. Like you have so many people reading data, interacting with it. How do you handle that? And like the validator really just handles like the right portion of it. And right now, a lot of DeFi teams rely on like kind of paying like a generic RPC provider. I think to get to like 100,000 users, you DeFi teams would probably need to roll their own RPC type infrastructure that's super tailored to their app. And I think that's how you get.
I think I saw Anatoly saying like the part that they're doing at labs is much easier than what they're doing or what we'll need to have happen on the RPC side.
Yeah, I think that's like the hardest part is like getting everyone who needs that data quickly. They're maintaining like up to date views of like the order book, the users, all these things. And when if you had 100K users and they're all trading, like that's kind of crazy. So you definitely would need to roll your own infrastructure. And then like, how do you do that and like still keep it permissionless and whatnot is definitely tricky. But I think that's one of the things you'd have to just grind out and make
Yeah.
work.
What are your thoughts in general? Have you looked too much into Fire Dancer and kind of the stuff that the Jump team is doing there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like I am not as close to that one. I think it's great if like the underlying, I guess, yeah, it increases like the bandwidth, which increases block size, which would probably increase the compute unit limits, which then will trickle down into protocols, basically getting more throughput. So on that side, I think it's great that like the underlying right layer is just getting maxed out. Besides that, I don't have a ton of hot takes, I guess. Yeah, I tend to like just focus on where the tech is and like really try to like how do I make it work for users now, not design a system that like could theoretically work if Fire Dancer works well because
True.
who knows how delayed it is and like you might be dead by then. So
True. Gotta crypto industry. You gotta stay on your toes.
yeah. I think if you have I guess if users trust that the contributors and the brand will build something good, then you'll have time to basically like adopt these changing technologies. So I think like the overly like research oriented people are probably necessary in some like second order consequence, but in terms of like keeping users, it's not. I don't think it's overhyped.
I agree. In terms of, I mean, in general on Solana, it kind of feels like the vibes have been changing. We have gone through a crazy bear market. FTX blew up. We've had the Luna crash. I mean, a lot of things. And I think out of the things that just indirectly or directly blew up, Solana kind of took the most backlash out of anything that did not blow up. And I feel like right now we're kind of having a little bit of a renaissance. People are calling for DeFi summer 2.0. Any of your thoughts on like current vibes, the renaissance of DeFi on Solana?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I mentioned before, like the tech was in a nascent form in 2021, and the price way outshot how like much people were using it on chain. And I think right now the price way like undershot it the other way, and the tech has gotten a lot better. And what you can do on Solana is actually really impressive. I think teams like Drift, Mango, Phoenix, like Orca, all these teams, Marinade, et cetera, Jito, built really cool things where if you compare it versus like their peer set on an ETH, like maybe the TVL numbers aren't as big, but I think like from a UX and like perspective, like definitely competitive and better in some areas. So I think, Jeff Bezos like talked about the stock market being like a weighing machine versus like, I forget the other one, but
Voting machine.
yeah, exactly. And you just got to trust that if the tech keeps getting better, the price will find an equilibrium there. And I think, yeah, it kind of got like a perception liquidation cascade with FTX. But the tech kept getting better and people kept working on it. And I think, yeah, people will come around.
To your point on TVL, I feel like it is kind of the last remaining point that the Ethereum crowd is like holding on to, saying, look how much liquidity we have. You have zero liquidity. You're dead on arrival. You're never going to catch up to us. How do you feel like, I mean, obviously the numbers speak for themselves. There is a lot more liquidity on Ethereum. How do you kind of feel like the lower amount of liquidity has either affected Drift and the product that you can build either directly or indirectly?
I guess the TVL side less, but the like liquidity side definitely more. Like I think a lot of people will use Drift and they'll be like, "Wow, this is like great product, one of the best DeFi protocols I've ever used." Liquidity is just not there yet, so definitely makes it harder, especially to get people to come over to bridge over to Solana and use it. So it's an uphill battle there, but I think it's one of these things where you get super fans, you get people using it, believing in it, and you just slowly kind of like projects get the next marginal user, and then when that happens, you can get one more, like you can get additional market makers, and that'll increase the liquidity. I think TVL, it's like TVL is a very inert metric. Like there's money sitting in a contract there. If you wanted to just be a scammer, like you can make a smart contract that just like is super simple and you put money into it. So I think the TVL is actually not a huge deal. I think that'll come. I think getting the market makers to come over to Sol is actually probably the bigger deal. And you just gotta like convince the next one to come over and keep doing that. And I think, a year from now the liquidity will be a lot better.
Do you feel like, I mean, prior to kind of the FTX blow up, I mean, there was Serum, FTX and Alameda were obviously kind of market making for that. I believe a couple others. Do you feel like just with all the chaos, with the regulatory uncertainty, the market makers were just like, we'll come back later? Or this is not for us right now. We'll see how it goes. And if this thing is still around or this ecosystem is still around in a year time, we'll come back and re-explore.
Yeah, I think when when shit's hitting the fan, everyone just goes in wealth preservation mode. They just like turn off the bots, like just like don't lose anything more. And I think yeah, with like regulatory stuff, just like and the chain did go down once in January or February, whenever it was, and like maybe people got spooked. And so what you have to do is just earn their trust back over time. So the longer a Solana network stays up, has no issues with throughput, more users keep coming. Like I think you just like get that excitement and trust back. And then there's all like the thing about like DeFi and crypto is like people are opportunistic. Like if they see something growing, like they'll move. So it's kind of like always just comes down to like having faith in the tech getting better, and then like basically disseminating the message that like this is really good, and like backing up with facts, and so people will slowly come around. And I think even this little bid that like Sol DeFi is catching will entice new market makers to come on, and that'll be like reflexive, right? More market makers, more liquidity, better user experience, and it'll kind of spiral. So I think think we're definitely on like a bit of a precipice of like growth, which is cool.
I agree. It feels like somewhere around the bottom. Hopefully that's already passed. But I mean, and to your point, if you don't look at prices, the tech has just gotten a lot better. And it is reflexive in the sense that kind of the best marketing tool is number go up. In any event, I feel like the sentiment, especially on Twitter, even in various communities, the products are much more mature. You're able to kind of see a little bit more liquidity with number going up, and it gets people excited. So I don't know. I do agree. I think there's some exciting things happening right now, and you guys are in a great place to take advantage of that.
Yeah, I think just build a good product, build something people love, and then work to build the network effects in a way that is sustainable. I think that's all you can do, and then you just like trust the process.
Trust the process.
Yeah.
Outside of DeFi, are there any particular categories or even other ecosystems, other categories of applications that you're excited about?
That's interesting. I guess I'm very interested in the Cosmos ecosystem. I think Solana monolithic approach is really good for bootstrapping, like a protocol, getting distribution, etc. But I do like something about like bootstrapping your own validator set and like customizing protocol logic in the actual validator is really enticing. Like you could do interesting like economic models and value capture. So that's always alluring.
What are your thoughts on L2?
Oh, L2s. I mean, I feel like the biggest advantage to L2s is they already have a network effect. But like, I'm not excited about like the tech that much, honestly, or at least the ones that exist right now.
Yeah, I don't even know if they have good network effects because you're kind of like restarting your own L1 community. You fragment the liquidity. I guess the nice thing is, I mean, most of the L2s today are EVM compatible, and so you can just kind of like port over your application. But if one application that you used to compose with is on one L2 and another is on a different L2, it kind of breaks your app or makes it much more challenging.
Yeah, I think like composability in those type of network effects definitely hurts, but I think the ETH DeFi people they put a lot of money into DeFi protocols. They trade a lot. Like they have size. So like like sometimes we'll talk to people like come try out Drift and they're like, I just don't want to like not use MetaMask. And like you're just like so I'm like that's like the best argument I've heard for ETH building on L2 is like then those people will use you. But besides that, it's not too exciting.
To me, that's like, I want to stick with dial-up, and what you guys are doing over there in broadband, just not for me.
Yeah. I guess I think about it as like they're harder people. Like they're not the next person to convince to try it out. So you can't convince them. You just got to go for the next marginal user.
100%. In terms of, I mean, being a core contributor to Drift, you've seen lots of ups and downs within the Solana market and just even product building yourself. What advice would you give to just like founders or even individuals that are interested in either playing around with the tech or ultimately have aspirations to build something?
That's a good question. I guess I feel like just like stay in the details. Like always just be double checking things, responding in Discord, like just caring about like what users are saying and just like take feedback and like don't get complacent because that's really the path to like building something great. I think is responding to feedback, like paying attention to detail, fixing things quickly. I think it's kind of easy to be like into like the high level stuff and like think about like strategy and research ideas, etc. But I think what's actually hard and the separation is like day in and day out, paying attention to the details and like listening to your users.
I fully agree. I mean, I think today it's very easy to get stuck in research mode, even on the application engineering side, because there's so many different rabbit hole. I mean, even things that we discuss with MEV or order flow, different L1s, app chains, different architectures. There's a lot of things to, I mean, even figure out to kind of be able to make educated decisions. And then once you get to that point, it's like, all right, do I feel like I have sufficient amount of information to kind of go execute on that? But at the end of the day, none of that really matters to the end user. They just want to have a great product. So there's a lot of things that you ultimately have to balance to, one, build a scalable application, but two, build an application that people actually love. That's challenging.
Yeah, definitely. It's very tempting on in crypto, especially if you're on crypto Twitter, to want to be to seem like intelligent and up to date and have a hot take on everything. And there's some people that can do that well, but like that's not what users really care about. So you got to be careful when you get into like the nerd sniping games, because
I agree.
yeah, like ideas are cheap until basically they're written in software running in prod. Until then, like they're not that valuable.
I agree. Perfect. Well, maybe we can end on that. Any final topics that we missed or didn't touch upon?
No, nothing's on my mind.
Cool. Well, Chris, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Really excited that we got to do this in person. It was a lot of fun. And look forward to having you back on sometime, and hopefully Solana DeFi 2.0 Renaissance.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Thank you.